this thing on until running tail. What's going on, everybody? Just a little bit. What is going on, everyone? This is your moron with the conscience, aka Conscious Moron. Appreciate the pull up as always. Of course, I've been on these streets trolling. I got to get back to it because it seems like the world is in peril and I have to save it. No, let me stop with my audacity, but I appreciate y'all pulling up. Please hit that like button for me. And if you haven't subscribed and shared, please do so as well. I appreciate that. I really do. But no, of course, we're talking about politics. I've been delving into this FBA really too much. It got my TikTok account banned, so it's really time to go hard. But nevertheless, and the thing about this FBA discussion is almost seeming to negate like our history, a part of our history. And I want to focus in on this one real quick because we're going to be getting into it. We might as well just never. If it's an old saying, if you're going to be a monkey, be a monkey figure gorilla. I don't know what I'm saying. It's early morning. But nevertheless, let's look at this real quick. And this is a part that I be talking like. It seems like a lot of FBA people almost negate certain facts. Or I don't want to say. It seems like when I have been watching and observing, it seems like it's two factions of FBAs. It's one faction that say that we are Indians. We come from Indians. And it's another faction that say, I guess that we were brought here, but when we came here, we became some type of new black people, almost in a sense. And it's so confusing. Maybe this part is just addressing the Indian side of it. So I want to try and say I'm coming at all FBAs because it seems like it's two different factions from what I've observed. That there's two different factions of FBAs. There's a faction, like I said, that deems that we are Indians and we were native to this land. And then I want to say, like, I'm not 100% sure with this other faction because it's like, it's kind of a lost identity. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's so, I won't say complex, but so divided even in the FBA struggle. Well, maybe the FBAs don't believe that they're Indians. Maybe that's just my misconception. But nevertheless, let's get to the slave trade real quick. Fair use. I want y'all to hear a few
images of extreme violence. We believe, however, it is important to discuss these ideas thoroughly so that we can fully grapple with the reality of U.S. history. An estimated 12.4 million people were loaded on slave ships and carried through what became known as the Middle Passage, which moved across the Atlantic and included many different destinations. It was named the Middle Passage because it was the second of three parts of what became known as the Triangular Trade. The first.
Okay, so maybe this is addressing the Indians because I was on a TikTok live and we were talking, and a young lady brought this up. She was like, my family's part of the Triangle Trade. I'm like, but that's just a part of the Atlantic Trade. And I'm like, that was literally a route. She didn't really comprehend that it was a route that was used on the Atlantic Trade slave. It was so crazy. And that's what I'd be like talking about. Like it's so complex and there are so many like non-resolved questions that I have. It might not be it might not be that FBA has these questions, but I do. And that's another thing I've been questioning on my lineage, where my people from, how many generations I've been here. Like this, and that's some of my questions too. Like how many generations does it take? You know what I mean? Like it's just so crazy. But let's listen on for a little bit longer.
First leg of the journey carried cargo like textiles, iron, alcohol, firearms, and gunpowder from Europe to Africa's western coast. When the ships reached the coast of Western Africa, the cargo was exchanged for people. From there, ships loaded with human beings made their way to the Americas, where the enslaved Africans were sold in exchange for goods like sugar and tobacco before the ships made their way back to Europe. It's estimated that over the course of the Middle Passage, 2 million African captives died, their bodies often tossed overboard. What some people might not know about the slave trade is that the vast majority of people did not actually go to the United States. In fact, far from it. Only about 5% of captured Africans were brought directly to what would eventually become the US. The largest proportion, around 41%, went to Brazil, while millions of others were...
Okay. And that's another thing about this FBA lineage, almost, in a sense, that, like, if we're just going, because you almost have to refute what history says or what people in history have presented. Like, you got to find evidence to refute that. And in some of the cases, it is the evidence you'll have, it wouldn't hold water in court. That, I mean, we can all have our opinions, but like proving it in court is something totally different. And I think that y'all forgetting that. I really do. I think that y'all forget that. So, like, let's just go with what dude was just saying. He said basically 12 million people came within 400 years, but 2 million of them jumped off the boat. So that would be like 10 million. And he said out of that 10 million, 5% went to the U.S. So that's roughly, what, 500,000. So this is 400 years. Do y'all think, I'm trying to think how many slaves were there in 1865? That is the question. Hold on. Give me 1 second, y'all. Don't Google this real quick. Because 1865 is the year when slavery ended. We're just gonna see. Okay, so there was around 4 million slaves at the end of 1865. And we're going to say that slavery started in 1619. So 1619 to 1865 is what. Let's do the math real quick, yo. 1865. Up early in the morning doing math. 1619. Say that's 246 years, roughly, to get 500. I mean, to get 4 million people out of 500. You think that could be done? Let's see what that is. It's going 4 million into 500,000. We can eliminate some. It's gonna be like 2. Let's see. Hold on. 1 million divided into 100,000. No, that's not right. I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure this out in my head, but it could be done, right? 4 million people with breeding farms. Could you make 4 million people over 246 years with breeding farms? Maybe we should ask AI, how long will it take? I wonder what the average. See, you got to figure out what was the average birth rate that a slave woman gave. Let's see that. Average numbers. So it's average number of slaves per plantation. There isn't an average number of slaves in very significant regions. Maybe we should ask about breeding farms. Breeding farms during slavery. It's like marathon. They're really not saying. Sure, they wouldn't even have those records, though, would they? Okay, I'm sorry, y'all. And I got off into my own little curiosity. Let's go back to this real quick. My apologies. Finish this out real quick.
Were scattered across islands in the Caribbean and South America. As we examine slavery in the United States, from its earliest moments when people were first taken from their homes, all the way through the end of the Civil War, it's important to lift up the narratives and accounts of enslaved people themselves, as they can provide us with a perspective on this horrific institution in ways that few other documents can. For example, Olaudah Equiano, an African captured as a boy, wrote in his 1789 autobiography the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano about the experience of being captured and taken to the edge of the ocean and being boarded onto the ship. I was immediately handled and tossed up to see if I were sound by some of the crew. And I was now persuaded that I had gotten into a world of bad spirits and that they were going to kill me. Their complexions, too differing so much from ours, their long hair, and the language they spoke, which was very different from any I had ever heard, united to confirm me in this belief. When I looked round the ship too, and saw a large furnace or copper boiling, and a multitude of black people of every description chained together,
Now, how can we negate all these? I won't say all these, but there are stories like this. There are many stories like these. So how can like y'all negate that and say like we aren't from Africa? Like that's what I'm saying. And maybe I'm just talking to the Indian side of everything. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's what I be getting lost in the sauce about. Like with all it's another story too that I posted. About a gentleman coming from Africa who, was rebellious. So there are many tales about these, you know what I'm saying? These Africans who came to America and then and like the one gentleman, he had a family. And I'm sure I can't remember his story all the way. But nevertheless, like we can't negate these stories of Africans telling their own enslavement. Like it's crazy.
every one of their countenances expressing dejection and sorrow. I no longer doubted of my fate, and, quite overpowered with horror and anguish, I fell motionless on the deck and fainted. Captured Africans didn't really have an understanding of what lay ahead for them. Enslaved Africans weren't coming back to Africa from the Americas and warning people about what happened. All people knew was what they saw in front of them: a large ship, an endless ocean, and for many of these Africans, people speaking a language they had never heard, with a color skin some of them had never seen. It's also important to note that the story is not as simple as Africans being hunted and captured by Europeans and forced onto ships against their will. The Africans who were taken and placed on board these ships were typically prisoners of war from other African tribes, people deemed criminals, and poor members of society who were often traded to pay off their...
Now, I want to say this right here. I wholeheartedly agree that Africans sold Africans in the Atlantic slave trade at one point in time. But I think it became so commodified that even those people who did that became enslaved. Like when the big mafia don come to the spot and he want to take it over, you gonna let him take it. You ain't got no choice. He gonna take it over. He got the muscle. So I think you know what I'm saying? I think that nuance is often sometimes negated in the FBA circle too. Like I wholeheartedly agree. Like Africans sold Africans, but like I said, they did it for different reasons, and not to negate the reason why they did it, they still did it. But I don't think it was solely. Just my perspective. I don't think they would have done it if they knew the repercussions of what they were going to do would cause to their country. I mean, to their continent. Not even just their country, but their continent. But we can always Monday morning history. That's the great thing about it. We can give our perspectives, but we don't. And that's what I be getting lost in sometimes. We can always give our perspectives on what we think is history, but we can't really understand what those people were going through at the time, because they had, I won't say limited information, but they don't have they don't have all the information like we do viewing history. You know what I'm saying? We have every aspect. Well, I won't say every aspect, but more aspect that, you know what I'm saying, they would have. But nevertheless, let's finish this out real quick.
They're dead. Which is to say, many captured Africans were sold to Europeans by other Africans for a range of different goods. Now, this fact can sometimes be used in bad faith to obfuscate the horrors of what the Europeans did. And while it's important not to ignore the fact that there were Africans trading other Africans into bondage, we should remember that being a prisoner of war or a poor member of society traded for goods is not the same thing as being held in intergenerational, hereditary chattel slavery that meant your children and their children and their children would all be born into bondage. That is something unique to the experience of slavery in the Americas.
Oh, okay, let's finish.
As the scholar Orlando Patterson has written, slavery is the permanent, violent, and personal domination of natally alienated and generally dishonored persons. You've likely heard about how horrible the conditions were on slave ships.
All right, y'all. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. I didn't realize the video was so long. My fault. We got to get it shorter, y'all. But as in always, as in closing, this is your Moron with the Conscious. I appreciate the pull up as always. And remember, without you, there would be no Moron. Peace. Y'all be safe.